Welcome back to the shop, everyone. In the next few episodes, I'm going to turn this trailer of scrap steel behind me into the next two projects, which is a welding bench, and then after that one, a gantry crane. Welcome everyone to Build or Buy It. My name is Mike, and this is my channel where I build things and then evaluate whether or not it's more cost effective to build them versus buying them. So if you recall from an episode or two ago, I showed you the computer design on the welding table I'm going to do. I decided to change up a little bit the design, so I'll pan you down here in a second and kind of explain what I'm going to do, because it makes the material go a little bit farther, and it'll be strong enough as is. So if you recall in the original drawing that I showed, I was going to use 2x4 square tubing or rectangular tubing with 1/4 inch wall, which I'm still going to do, but those drawings showed the tubing on edge like this here, this piece, and the tubing is clearly stronger, just like if you think of it like a wood 2x4. If you put a 2x4 on anything on edge, it's going to be stronger in relation to downward force and flex than it would be flat. However, to save a little bit of material, I decided to lay it flat. I was a little concerned about the loss of strength, or not loss, but that wouldn't be quite as rigid that way. So I plugged a 2x4 1/4 inch wall tubing into the deflection calculator I have that shows how much deflection there is for a given load. And it was for no more than I'll ever put on this table. It literally is a few thousandths. I think if I put like a 100-pound load on just one of these, again, this is about the layout. If I put out like 100 pounds on just one of these, it would deflect. I think it was like 15 or 20,000, something like that. I can't remember exactly. Way less than I'm worried about. Not to mention there'll be 6 of these. All 6 of those will be tied together on the ends with another piece of 2x4 that's actually on edge. And then there'll be one underneath, probably not 2x4, probably some 2x2, I haven't decided for sure, that ties all of them in the middle. And then off of that, there'll be additional kind of a diagonal leg or kicker that comes down to each one of the legs, kind of to give it a truss affair. So there's virtually, I'm not at all concerned about any deflection that there might be by using them on edge. So I'll pan you down again so you can kind of get an idea of why I went with the design I did, which there's a 2-inch spacing. The plan is to have a 2-inch spacing in between every one of these. Let's switch it over here, you can get a little bit better angle. There's a 2-inch spacing in between each one of these for a couple different reasons. One reason is I plan on one end of this, I'll put a couple stops in here to, in essence, make a 2-inch square, which 2-inch square tubing will fit right into that like it would be a stinger and a receiver hitch. And so then my vise plate mount will be on a piece of 2-inch receiver or 2-inch square tubing that'll drop into that, and that way I can take the vise on and off if the vise was in the way, but it'll give me a nice stable platform for the vise. The other reason is I've got just a piece of scrap here, and all of the different styles of clamps that I would potentially use. And as you can see, that 2-inch space gives you the ability to tuck a clamp in underneath. If I wanted to spend lots and lots of money, I could go out and buy one of the higher end solid steel tables that has all of the holes already drilled in them. Those are more than I want to spend. There's a fair number of welding tables that you'll probably see that people will build that will be out of just like, let's say, 1/4 inch flat plate, maybe even thicker. The downfall with that is plate is surprisingly not very flat. So unless you're going to have it machined afterwards, plus it's going to be susceptible to warping if you do tack things down to it. So I preferred to go this route. The really high-end tables are made out of cast iron for good reason, because cast iron is very stable and it doesn't move much with heat. They can cast ribs into the bottom, so I think Fireball probably makes one of the best ones out there that has all of the holes in it. It's ground on the face and on the sides, so I don't need anything nearly that elaborate for what I do. So this is what I'm going to stick with. So one of the first steps I've got to get done on these is I did buy this steel used. I think I talked about that because new steel is getting ridiculously expensive. So I found these. It's for the most part new. They were just drops. There's a little bit of rust on them. Most of the ends have one saw cut end and then also one flame cut end. But I checked them with a square, and they're actually, even the flame cut ends are square, really square in both axes. Square enough for what I'm going to do, because again, I'm going to cap it with another piece of 2x4. So the first step I got to do is get these cut to length. If you recall, the table was going to be 3 feet by 4 feet. So the 4 feet will still be what it'll be. These, because of the layout, I ended up being 34. So a couple inches short of 3 feet, but by using 6 of those, I got really close to what I wanted to do. So because I want the finished piece to be 48 inches long, and I'll be capping these with 2x4 on edge, that adds 4 more inches. So these need to be 48 minus 4, so 44 inches long. So I'm going to get these all laid out, and then I'll bring you back, and I'll probably show you cutting 1 or 2 of them. But I'm just going to use the cold cut saw, which you've seen me use a number of times before. So I'll show you 1 or 2 cuts, and then we'll get laid out and start. I'll show you how I'm going to clamp these and jig them up to keep them as flat as possible when I weld them up. So there's cut number 1, 6 more to go. Okay, that's the final cut. That is one thing that I don't necessarily, about the only thing I don't like about the cold cut saw is it throws those chips everywhere, and since they're a little bit hot when they come off there, they have a tendency to stick to anything that, like if there's extension cords on the ground, it'll slightly melt into that extension cord plastic. So then when you go to coil the cord up, you can cut your hands pretty easy. So I always try to make sure that I don't have anything directly in the line of those chips. And maybe one of these days I'll try to come up with some kind of a chip catchment that just drops them into one pile, but we'll see. So let me get you back over here to the trailer, and we'll talk a little bit about what's next. Okay, as you can see there, I've got all 6 of those cut. There's virtually very little burr, if any, but I am going to, because there's some mill scale on those, and I'm going to be doing some welding, not a lot of welding, because you'll see later on when I get this set up with the end pieces, the more you weld on something, the more it's going to pull or distort. So I just need to basically get this kind of tacked together with some pretty heavy tacks. So I'll probably do them in the corners that causes the least amount of pull. So when I get it all clamped up, I'll do those. But because I am welding on them, not that the welder won't burn through this mill scale, but I still like cleaning the mill scale off any place I'm going to weld. So I'll clean that up here with a flap desk. And speaking of welding, you'll probably spot it at some point in the video, so I guess I'll swing you around here and show you my latest addition to the shop. The welder I had was a 175 amp, 220 volt machine that I built the trailer with, and it does just fine as far as total penetration and those things, but it doesn't have, or didn't have, a very good duty cycle. So if you're going to do a lot of continuous welding, I'd have to stop and give it a break. So I'm going to keep that welder because it has a spool gun for aluminum, and I'll just leave it set up for aluminum. And I picked up this Miller the other day, about half the price of what they're selling for. It's a 251, which is kind of a workhorse from Miller from a lot of years back. I don't think they even make that model anymore, but they just run and run and run. Much higher duty cycle. It was a little bit banged up and beat up. It had been used pretty heavily. So the sheet metal work was, as you would expect in a shop, banged up and beat up. So I went ahead and pulled all the sheet metal off, stripped the paint off, fixed a few dents there were, got some new decals, painted it back to the original Miller blue. Last week I just made this real quick stand here to coil the cord up on it, because they really don't have a cord holder. And then this spot here is factory original, but what it was just a holster to stick the gun nozzle in, but then the gun stuck out here a long ways. So I basically cut the guts out of that and left the opening in the sheet metal, and to cover that up, and then I made a little door here, bent up a little door out of some ABS, put a magnet latch on the back side, and a little ledge here in the front. I'll get you in a little closer. And that way it's just a storage spot for some of the stuff, an extra set of knurled rollers for flux core wire, some cleaner for the felt pads, things like that. So you can keep a few things in there that you would normally want to have right with the machine. So it's kind of nice having that little bit more industrial machine. All right, so let me get these the mill scale off of these and get them kind of propped up how I'm going to do them, and then I'll bring you back and we'll talk more about exactly how I'm going to try to keep them flat. All right, so I got all the setup done here. I'll swing you around here and kind of explain what I did. It would have been boring for you to watch. It was just a matter of clamping and tapping things around with a hammer. So I took two pieces of the 2x4 right here, one on each end. Use those as basically a straight edge to clamp all of the actual table pieces to. These are maybe not 100% perfectly straight. It's not like they're ground, but they're straight as any steel I have around here. And for what this is going to be, they'll work just fine. I thought about using a 3-wire method like Fireball did one time on one of his to get this, but again, it's short of grinding these, I'm not going to get it any flatter than it is right now. So I set two of those up. They're set on just some riser wood blocks that dimensionally don't really matter much. That leaves me, the reason why I was on wood blocks is that leaves me room for a clamp right here. So then I also, down at the other end, you can see, maybe see I've got some shims in here. So even though these are very, very rigid, as I clamp them down, if both of these pieces here, if this piece here, if they were not parallel, in theory when I clamped it, I could put some twists or some rack into it. So I shimmed this up and leveled these very accurately, and then on the other end, same thing, shimmed those so they're both as parallel as I can get them at least. So that gave me somewhat of a flat working plane to clamp all of these to. So then I set the first one on there, clamped it down, it's just as a starting point. Then I cut I wanted a tiny little bit of wiggle room in between them instead of being exactly 2 inch. So I just cut some exact 2 inch pieces. Actually, they're like 2 inch 40 thousandths blocks of wood, and I dropped those down in there. And once the first one's clamped, I had two of them. I set one on each end. I would scoot the next block or the next tubing up to it, and then the same time before I clamped it down, then I just take a square. I have a much bigger square that reached all the way across all of them, and I would lay that on here, and that made sure that they were, the depth this way was the same on all of them. And then just proceeded my way across, clamping and squaring each pair up, divided by or separated by one of these blocks. So here's from a clamping perspective, it doesn't really matter, but like I mentioned, I wanted to be able to use a 2-inch square tube for various different things, for a vise mount, anything else I'd want to drop in here. So here's a piece of 2-inch like you would have on a receiver hitch, and that drops down in that space with just enough. Let me go over here where you can see a little better maybe. It drops down in there just enough clearance so that you're not going to have to fight it or have it get wedged in there, but still be stable. Again, you can see I got all the scale off. So the next step is to cut the end caps, which will be longwise, and get those clamped into place. Because there could be some variation in the tubing, hopefully there's not much, but because there could be some, instead of this being the top of the welding table, this bottom surface will in essence be the top, so it's upside down. The reason being is every one of those is clamped to this beam, so therefore the chance of them being the flattest is the best. So when I put the piece of strap here, so when I put a piece of this on edge, I wouldn't want to do it like this because this overhangs, so it'll come up here. I'll use a piece of tubing or something to hold that in place, and then that'll cap them all off and add a lot of rigidity to them. So let me get those pieces cut, and I'll be right back. Okay, so other than a mass amount of clamps that you can see in the background, I got set up here with the end caps. I'll explain what I did. Pretty straightforward. Because as I mentioned, this is upside down, so the underside of these tubes is the top. Therefore, these tubes I need to stick proud. And so this surface here needs to be plumb or flush with the bottom of these. So that was easy enough to do. This black piece here is just a piece of square tubing. I clamped it to these pieces. So that created a shelf that is on the same plane as these. I just set this piece down also on that piece of square tubing, clamped it just lightly so it can't move. So that puts this face the same. Put both ends in place, just put a couple bar clamps on it just to hold them tight so when I tack it, it doesn't move too much. I did get these pieces as close as I could to square. Don't know that I'll ever need to, but if I ever wanted to clamp something to this face as well as the opposite side of these, that would hold it in a 90-degree orientation for welding. So I've got it clamped as much as I can to hold it in place. I'm not going to do any heavy welds, of course, because that will pull, so I'll go around and tack in a lot of the corners. And then I can put some, just to extend those tacks, make them a little bit stronger. And then as I mentioned, I won't get carried away with welding it because I don't want it to pull out of shape. So I'll tack it enough that I can unclamp it, flip it over. And then because of the radius of this tube and the other pieces butted up, that created a nice little fillet, like a weld prep area that I'll be able to put a bead in. I'll show you that when I get to that part. So let's get some tack welds done here. I'll scoot you back. So I just put tack welds there in each one of the corners on both sides. So that'll hold it in place so I can flip it over and put a little bit heavier bead that underside. So I will bring you back when I've got it flipped over, because probably going to have to get help from the neighbor to do that because that's pretty darn heavy. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so what I've got there is I cut the, I think I mentioned I was going to put a cross member across all the pieces That way each, if I was to put something fairly heavy on with just one, it'll transfer some of that weight to the other. So I got that piece cut, we'll get that tacked into place, and then I'll be ready to flip it over. One thing about it, it is definitely stout. Might do a quick Google and see how much that weighs per foot and give you a number here. Stand by. The welding table, right the way it sits, without legs or anything else, and that alone, not counting that little piece of 2-inch square tube in the middle, it's just a 2x4 by 1/4 inch wall. There's 260 pounds there. So by the time I get the legs on there and a few other things, that'll probably be close to 300 pounds. Well, finished, I'm just going to put an inch or so long stitch on the tops of each one there, just like I did on the bottom, and that'll finish it up for the welding. I don't want to weld it solid and start worrying about warping, so get that knocked out. All right, give you a look here. All right, that's, I think I'm gonna call it a night. It's getting close to dinner time, and I'll come back, and it won't take much to throw the legs on. I'll show you those. Well, the place I got the steel from, they're basically a steel recycler that most steel suppliers use, so all the drops or the leftovers, they take them there, and it's about half price of what new would be. So when I was there picking up, they had piles and piles of these legs pre-made up and powder coated with some holes and slots in it for some kind of shelving. So those worked out well. All I have to do is cut them to length, and I am going to put the casters I'm going to use are going to be casters that do have a stud in the center versus a flanged mount, and that way if I'm doing something where I need the table nice and level, I can adjust the height of each leg or each caster to make the table nice and level and supported by all 4 wheels. So anyway, I'm going to call it a night, and we will see you later. Okay, so I just finished up editing the video that I had, and I'm at about 20 minutes, so I still got a little bit of time left. However, I've been waiting for the casters that I ordered, and today is Friday, and I like to post my videos on Friday if possible, so I'm just kind of going to give you a little bit of coverage here on how flat the table came out, and then we'll wrap it up. And if you want to see the rest of the build, including the legs, you can come on back. So actually the casters did come, they just literally came now, and so I just don't have time before I like to get this posted to get those made. So I guess I'll touch on the casters a little. They're a 5-inch. It's kind of dark in here because I'm going to show you how flat the table is with a flashlight, so that's why it's dark. So they're a 5-inch caster, lockable both on the swivel and the wheel, double ball bearings on the wheel, ball bearings on the swivel. I think they were rated, if I remember right, at 700 pounds each, so that's 2,800 pounds. There's no way I'm ever going to put that much weight on that, so they should hold up pretty well. I haven't decided on the height yet. I'm going to kind of just play around with sitting at like my table saw on my wood bench, and then standing at those and kind of trying to maybe come up with a happy medium of, if I'm going to be having to do some real precise TIG work or something, it's nice to be sitting so you can rest your arms. So I'll figure out the height, and then we'll go over that. So in the meantime, I'm going to scoot you down here and kind of show you how flat the table came out, given, see if I can scoot you down low enough here where you're on the same plane. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'll go turn off the rest of the lights in the shop, and I'm just going to take, this is a very precision straight edge, as you can see. Some people call it a level, but for what I'm doing, it's going to be straight enough. I did run a precision stone across it to make sure that there wasn't any high spots that would hold it up. So I've got it set on there. I'm going to turn the lights off. I'm going to backlight the level with a flashlight. And I'll actually need to lower you down even a little more. I'll backlight it. Okay, I think that's about right for the height. So let me go turn the lights off. If there's any gap between those, you would see the light through it. So stand by here. I didn't see. I'll switch it to a diagonal. You guys probably can't see that, but I won't lie to you. There's no light coming out from underneath that one either. So, for no more precision than I need it to be, let's get the lights back on. For no more precision than I need it to be, I'm very happy with how it came out. So the next steps will be, as I mentioned, I'll figure out the leg height, get the casters on there. I'll have a little bit of reinforcing bars as I talked about. And then just so it looks a little, I mean, of course I don't want to paint it on the metal surface because you need that for the ground, unless you're going to hook your ground separate. But I do want it to look nice, so I'll sandblast the majority of it and paint everything except the top surface that the welding would occur on. So anyway, I'm hoping I can finish this up in a second episode, one more episode. So come on back and see the welding table once it's completed. Thanks.